Welcome back to Lenz Comic Corner, Classic, Non-Classic. This is episode number 2648. And, 2748. And Doubleshot 2642. These two series, I have decided to come back to these series, first time in a while. Yeah, we're talking about Doom Patrol and Alpha Flight. For Doom Patrol, we're here discussing the last 8 issues of Doom Patrol Volume 3 by John Assanti, which still to this day, after 22 years after this run's conclusion, there is no trade for this run. It is the only volume out of the entire series not in trade. And there's no reason for this. It's just so bizarre. Is this a bad run? Not really, no. Basically, what kind of happens issues? Well, we have lots of stuff happening here. A lot of it's focused on Robot Man. And, of course, him reuniting with his family. Well, basically his brother's family. And him also fixing a car. And there's some stuff with Doom Patrol themselves, this incarnation Doom Patrol. They don't do much for these final 8 issues before the group ultimately disband, or basically kind of split up by the end of the volume. Excuse me. There's even one issue where they do like a movie version of the Doom Patrol, or Robot Man looks kind of similar to what he did in the original Arnold Drake run, except he's blue instead of gold. I found that quite interesting. But the sad thing about the final issue of the book is that we revealed the fate of Dorothy Spinner. Basically, it was revealed at the issue 12 that she's been in a coma since the end of Volume 2 of the series. And at the end, the final issue of this book, she is taken off life support. Well, ventilation. And she dies. And apparently, Cliff was her legal guardian. Because there was like no other relative she had. And, well, he argued against it. But a very good argument. But basically, it's not due to money because there's no activity. Because there's nothing there. So, he agrees to allow it to happen. But he's not going to be able to witness it. And Dorothy Spinner dies. And that's the last you see of Dorothy Spinner. She is never mentioned much after this. You might be curious, does she pop up in the current continuity? I think she did in the most recent Doom Patrol book. But, yeah, she died of natural causes. As for what the heck caused her in a coma, this is something this book does never explain. It's just that she went crazy at the end of Doom Patrol Volume 2. The other members of Doom Patrol supposedly died. And Robot Man died and then he got a new body. It was a bit confusing by the end of this. And you can see why that DC decided to reboot Doom Patrol with Volume 4 by John Byrne. Because, like, you think, like, oh, are they relying too much on continuity with this particular book? Not necessarily, no. It did feel like a fresh start, basically, for Doom Patrol. It was, at the time, the first Doom Patrol book released in, like a little over a decade. Because between Volume 2 and 3, all they did appear was, like, a couple one-shots. And that was it. Yep, and then, like, not only after this, we have the reboot of the Doom Patrol by John Byrne. A very controversial reboot, but it's a good ride. I'll talk about that at another point, but my final thoughts on Volume 3 of Doom Patrol, it's a very weird run per se. And the writer of this book, it's like the only thing I've known him for, aside from this book, was he did the Fight Bolt issues for Thunderbolts, which I recently saw the trade for that on Barnes & Noble. Yes, they had this book for some reason. I'm like, really? Yeah, there is a trade that collects the Fight Bolt issues, but not the rest of the well, there is some of the collect issues in trade, but this book, I really wish was in trade. It's actually a pretty good run. It's a run that nobody talks about Doom Patrol. People talk about like Volume 1, and Volume 2, and 4, and maybe 5, but this run? No. Nobody talks about this run. It definitely was Doom Patrol. May not have been what basically came before, but it was. Now, here's the thing. Doom Patrol, in the last issue ever released for Doom Patrol, it was under the Vertigo imprint. So people may assume that, oh, the Adventures of Doom Patrol have a different continuity. Because, well, they happen under Vertigo. Not necessarily, no. There's actually about one or two other books that were published under Vertigo, but were still take place in the main continuity. Doom Patrol was one of them, along with Sandman. I believe Animal-Man, that was another one. Swamp Thing, and I think that was it. Where initially they started out in DC Universe like mature readers, and they became Vertigo, and still was considered canon. Yep. But that's it for Doom Patrol Volume 3. When I come back to Doom Patrol, we'll talk about Volume 4 for the series. Next up we have is basically some Alpha Flight. We're discussing issues 45 to 66 of Doom Patrol Volume 1, along with the second and final ever annual for the series. So, throughout these issues of this book, we are basically wrapping up Bill Manslow's very lengthy run of the book. There is like a bit of politics here. The fact that at one point they go to China, apparently without authorization from the Canadian government. And there's also with Box in here as well. The early issues has it where the original host of Box actually dies. Yeah, Rock Box actually dies. Which for some reason the artist apparently forgot the fact he was a paraplegic. You know, we had he didn't have arms or legs. Here he's got arms. Did the artist forget the fact he didn't have those? And of course, the way he was written here was a bit out of character for him, where basically he was mad at Jeffrey, the current host of Box, for basically just manipulating him to get the robot. And the way it was structured here is like he was in a relationship with Heather, Vindicator. Sasquatch, for some reason, was declared dead, and now when he transforms back, he's a woman. And apparently, despite the fact he tried to get his money back, because he's rich, was allowed to because he's legally dead. And they try to get his estate back, they even try to sue him. It was a very confusing thing for Bill Mantlo to do with this. The whole thing with the Canadian government, where, basically, the way that they're... Now, the one person who would be a very competent politician here is the chairman of the committee, because basically she calls out her own colleagues for the bullcrap. And the fact that one of them apparently has stuff in his party that's against Alpha Flight. You know, the Canadian premier superhero team. And Vindicator basically points out, though, the reason why they basically do what they do because they protect the land where they were created. It's their home. And they also mentioned the whole thing. In fact, they actually had a mansion at one point that got burned down by this guy working with them. And by the end of this, basically, at one point, you have Heather, Box, and not Sasquatch. One other person went to space. There's also a mission focused on Puck, where I think he's trying to get back to his previous self. And that's kind of what happens here. Oh, the annual is simply put basically Alpha Flight on a deserted island. Some of the Alpha Flight members and their costumes falling apart. Yes. And there's also talks about the disbanding Alpha Flight, but that doesn't happen just yet. But this run was actually really good. This was by far the longest run in the history of the book, lasting 37 issues. Because actually more like 30, it lasted 38 issues, which makes it the longest run in the history of this title. Yes. And here's the sad thing about this run. Only one issue of this entire freaking runs in trade. Excuse me, thinking which one? The answer. Oh yeah, there's also mention of Omega Flight here. They also explore in here in these issues, like the public's perception of Alpha Flight, where at one point you have Vindicator telling the press, do not stop rolling camera just because they probably think they probably should, but no, keep the cameras going. and everything she says is basically released to the public. Yes. Which, well, I can tell anyways by the reception from the public, seems like it was a very positive reception, so it could have worked, but who knows. Yeah, and their place writer, he is not here very long. He's here for 20 issues. Yeah, by the way, this run actually had about 5 more writers left. You had James Harnell, who did Next Issue, we'll discuss another time. Fabian Nicieza, Scott Lobdell. Simon Farmer was the final writer of the book. You had affiliation by Stev Larson. Yes. Oh, by the way, who did these issues artwork? It was basically June Barwell, who did 45 to 50. 50 to 52 was Jim Lee. Yes, Jim Lee did some issues of this book. Hugh Haynes, who did pretty much the rest of the book. There's no credit for the artists for 63 and 64. Yeah, no credit for those two artists, but a lot of fun this run. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I give these issues for Alpha Flight a 10 out of 10. My final thoughts of Bill Mantlo's run. Really interesting. I do like the fact that it felt like a continuation. It felt like basically like the very next step in development of Alpha Flight. Because, writers nowadays where as soon as the writer comes on board, they'll just ignore the previous writer, what they set up, what people like about the run. But there have been times basically like this where it felt like a continuation of the same run that some people liked and kept it going. Yes, Purple Woman does some stuff in here, but she's not part of, she's still part of the team. Yeah, Wolverine helps out with them too, which is quite interesting. So, is there any new members this period of time? Nope. Basically, Madison Jeffries was the last person to join during John Byrne's run. And then here's the weird thing. There was no new members after this. Yeah, there was, of course, Beta Flight. Yep. Beta Flight members, they had the training team, which is comprised of Purple Girl, Zeba Kilgrave's daughter, Minkin, Goblin, Pathway, and that's it. Yeah, about 4 people. Gamma Flight had no members. Of course, well, Omega Flight is mentioned here, but they're not here. And I do like Heather basically point out, though, that are you blaming Alpha Flight for Omega Flight and Master of the World? She does basically, I do appreciate Bill Mantlo writing her to be a very competent character, and the fact that she points out that, yeah, there are some people who may not like superheroes, but the thing is, the common belief in story, even if they have the EC2, where the heroes are responsible for the creation of the villains. That's a common misconception. In the case of Alpha Flight, she puts that to rest. Alpha Flight is not responsible for the creation of Flight Master of the World. That came because of Alpha Flight. There probably was needed to balance the order of things. It was not people in the Bat books. People blame Batman for turning people into criminals. And that's a common stigmata for Batman books I've never been a fan of. And in the case of Flight, it's like Bill Mantlo is basically poking fun of that and saying, yeah, no. Alpha Flight nothing to do with the creation of Omega Flight or Master of the World, which were the only main villains in this book at this period of time. Yeah, that's the weird thing about Alpha Flight. They didn't have a lot of villains. Basically, the bad guys were Atuma, Brain Drain, a version of Resident Evil, Flashback, Yoda Lily, Jerry Jackson, who was a early villain in the book, which a great character John Byrne created. Yeah. Yeah. And there's also stuff in here about Department H. Now, the X Men are watching this, but they do not interfere. Yeah. But it's like, okay, I'm glad the fact the X Men are watching this, but how come we're not getting reaction for the Fantastic Four, the Avengers, or Spider Man for this stuff? Oh, and there's also a bit of anti hysteria in Canada, which, according to Wolverine, they think, oh, the whole team's mutants. Wolverine points out though the team is made up of like two or three members are in fact mutants. The rest are not mutants. They're just probably enhanced humans per se, but they're not mutants. Wolverine knows. But there's no denying, these issues were fantastic. Amazing. And of course, like I mentioned, next time will be the replacement run with the book, which I will be skipping over 2 issues of this run because I view them already. And those issues being issues 60, 79, and 80. Yep. But yeah, that's particularly a particular view. Please be sure to like, comment, subscribe to notifications, and do not hit the dislike button. I wasn't going to say, but I figured I wanted to get done. Let's get done. That time, guys. Let's watch it, and I'll probably review it later. Okay, next video. Probably tomorrow. Probably on today.